Hello, everyone. We are happy to welcome you at the Women Who Code Kyiv event, which is devoted to the topic of privacy by design. And this event is kind of special because usually we conduct events in either Ukrainian or Russian, and this time we will have it in English since our speaker, Jodie, is joining us from London. So stay tuned, you will find out more about privacy and how you can kind of embed it into your development process. So for those who are for the first time joining Women Who Code event, I'm just going to share a little bit about Women Who Code. Women Who Code is a global community which exists in multiple countries, including Ukraine. And in Kyiv, the community was created almost 5 years ago. So next year we are going to celebrate our anniversary. And our main mission is just to inspire women to kind of develop in the technical careers, to get to the leadership positions, whether it's in software engineering, as being a technical leader, executive founder, and so on. And we do that by organizing events of multiple formats, like tech talks, like today, when we have one or multiple speakers, workshops, which is more practical, or when we have panel discussions with multiple speakers discussing some kind of topics. And also we have a mentorship program, which helps people from different backgrounds reach their goals. So also we have different technical directions, for example, quality assurance, data science, security, like this event. And we organize events by these different technical directions. And also we have leaders of those directions. So this event is organized by Yulia, who is the leader of security direction, and I also helped to organize this event, and I'm the lead of data engineering direction. So we have a code of conduct, which is a very important set of rules, and the main thing is just to be respectful and nice to each other, to help each other if it's needed, and in case of any incident, whether on our events or within our channels of communication, you can just reach out to the leadership team and we will handle these incidents. And you can always get help on any of the issues. Also, we exist in multiple social media, including Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Telegram. So mostly in these channels, you can find out more about next events, previous events, some discounts for the conferences, or even free tickets for our members of the community. Also, we have a Slack channel where we communicate mostly around organizing events or around any technical topics that we are interested in. So you can join this Slack channel by finding the form in our Facebook, and you can communicate more on the topics that you're interested in, or even find some jobs which we share there as well. So what's the way to actually take part in Women Who Code community? One of the ways is just joining our events, like today, when you just came to listen and ask some questions. You can also become a speaker. We're always happy for newcomers, for someone who is doing that for the first time, or experienced speakers as well. So if you're interested to share some topic, just reach out to us. You can become a mentor to someone or find a mentor if you need that through our mentorship program. Also, as I mentioned, we partner often with conferences and some companies, so you can get discounts or free tickets for the meetups or conferences. And a lot of companies and people working in those companies share some job opportunities within our channels, so you can apply to those or share some of the job opportunities from your company. And as I mentioned, you can just communicate in any topics that are interesting for you, whether around tech, around feminism as well, diversity. We have all of that in our Slack channels. And you can become a volunteer and help us organize our events. Since we are a nonprofit organization, we are just all volunteering here and kind of sharing our time to make these events better for you as attendees. So we are creating this event in partnership with Captify, and I'm going to pass it to Sabrina to talk a little bit about Captify and what this company does.
Hello, everybody. It's a pleasure to be a part of this event this evening. So yes, I'm Sabrina and I manage the recruitment at Captify. So essentially, Captify have built a technology which understands consumer behaviour online. We work with major media agencies to work alongside them and help them place their products in front of the right audience. And we also work with some very well household name brands called Apple, as you know, Disney, Adidas, American Express. So we've got some really good global brands under our belts. We have a very exciting engineering team based in Kiev. So that's where our main hub is. And you can expect our engineers to be anything from team leads, tech leads, engineers, and product managers. There's lots of opportunity all the time on our engineering team at Captify, which I really want to take tonight to be a great opportunity for us to network and for us to connect on LinkedIn so that we can keep in touch for future opportunities. We have a couple of teams on the engineering team in Kiev. So we've got 5 product teams: data product, segmentation, measurement and optimization, intent and ingestion, activation and integration. And we have also 4 platform teams: infrastructure, data infrastructure, Q&A and ops. I would love to have an opportunity after this event to get in touch with anyone that's looking for opportunities at Captify. Roxalana, would you, and I believe we have one open head at the moment. I'm not sure if you guys can see that.
Yeah, if you would scan a QR code, you would see the link to the open opportunities.
Oh, perfect. So we've got one open head. However, in next year in Q1, we will have more opportunities. So let's do keep in touch.
Thank you, Sabrina.
Thank you.
So today our agenda is just one talk by Jodie, and she's going to talk about privacy by design. And you can shoot your questions right while she's doing a speech, and we will read it out loud later. Or you can also ask them during the Q&A because we'll have some time after the talk. So welcome, Jodie.
Thank you. Let me try and share my screen. Okay. Great. So can you see my screen?
Yeah.
Excellent. So yeah, hi everyone. Thank you so much for having me. I'm Jodie, so I'm the General Counsel and Data Protection Officer for Captify. So Sabrina's just told you a little bit about what we do. I'm super excited to be in this role, and I love working at Captify and love doing the stuff that I'm doing. So hopefully I can share a bit of that joy with you this evening. So just to set the scene, when putting together this presentation, I went back and forth quite a few times about what I wanted to cover over the next half an hour to 40 minutes. And as a lawyer, I really had to fight the temptation to not go into granular detail about what the concept of privacy by design means from a legal perspective, and like what your obligations would be to ensure that your company wouldn't get fined or investigated. But I genuinely believe that compliance with the law shouldn't be the only reason that privacy by design should be the top of everyone's mind. So you'll be pleased to hear that I've decided not to go down a deep dive of the law, but instead just to explain to everyone why I think everyone should care about privacy by design, but especially why I think you could really care about privacy by design, like the people who are actually building the products. But first, so what is privacy by design? So firstly, you should know that privacy by design is not a new concept. But when the General Data Protection Regulation, the GDPR, came into force in 2018, it did make it a legal requirement. So that's when we started hearing it more in conversations in companies. So the GDPR requires a company to put in place appropriate technical and organizational measures to implement the GDPR sort of overarching data protection principles. And effectively, the end goal of that is that we safeguard individuals' rights. So in essence, this means that we must integrate or like bake in data protection into everything that we do. So right from the design stage of like coming up with a product, right through the life cycle, like even when we decommission products at the end and we delete the data or anonymize the data, we always have to be thinking about privacy. But what privacy by design means in practice will be completely different depending what company you work from. And it also depends on what your company does. So we work a lot with data. So for us, it's something that's super important. If you work in a shop, then maybe it's slightly less important if your day-to-day doesn't involve using data. But I think the best way to tackle this is for me just to give you a few examples about why I think it's important, and then walk you through some of the things that we're doing at Captify so you can sort of see what that looks like in practice. So if there's only one thing that you take away from this presentation, I want it to be this. Just because you build a product to be used in a particular way doesn't necessarily mean that it will. And that doesn't mean that someone is going to take your work and use it for like evil 5 years from now, but because even you might use your product in a different way 6 months from now, a year from now. So it's something to bear in mind. So I've seen firsthand that when we build new products and software, we can get so focused on ensuring that it works as a solution to like a particular problem that we forget to take a step back and just think, wait, what am I actually building here? What else can my product be used for? What else can this be used for? Can it be used for something better? Can it be used for something worse? So to illustrate this, I have wanted to just share a couple of examples with you. The first one I'm hoping sort of demonstrates what happens when the data collected to solve one problem is shared with a third party to solve a completely different problem. And the second example is something that's slightly closer to Captify, which is what happens when we design an algorithm that can actually be used for multiple different purposes. So the first example is the case of the Fitbit use. So here are the facts of the case. Karen Navarra, a 67-year-old pharmacy technician, was found dead in her kitchen. She was found slumped over in her chair, holding a massive kitchen knife with a gaping slit in her neck. Police at the time said Navarra's death appeared to be a staged suicide because she had the knife in her hand, clearly didn't slit her own neck. One of the suspects in that murder was a guy called Anthony Aiello, so called him Tony. Tony was married to Karen's mother and by all accounts didn't have a wonderful relationship with Karen. Tony's alibi was that he had visited Karen to bring her pizza, he stayed for 15 minutes and then he said he went home. And later that night, he said he saw her drive past his home with somebody else in the car. However, the police say that the Fitbit Karen was wearing showed a significant spike in heart rate, followed by a rapid slowdown, and then eventually just stopping at 3:28 in the afternoon. So this is 5 minutes before he left. No surprise, Tony was arrested. Case closed. But why am I telling you this? So it's thought that over 31 million people use Fitbit at least once a week. So it's inevitable, you'd say, that a Fitbit would eventually be worn by either a victim of a crime or a suspect during like a criminal investigation. However, if we're using trackers in criminal investigations, it would seem to me, at least from a legal perspective, that the devices we use are accurate. Not just on average, but at that very specific point in time that the crime was committed. Now, I wear a Fitbit sometimes, and just a couple of days ago when I was exercising, it said that it had detected no heartbeat through most of my workout. And I can promise you that I was very much alive and slightly heartbroken that my entire exercise wasn't actually tracked. So should we be trusting this device in a criminal investigation? Well, even Fitbit's own terms of service point out that it is a consumer product with accuracy that is not intended to match that of a medical device or scientific measurement devices. So some of you may be sat there thinking, but it's a good thing that we use data in this way. It's generally accurate and it means that we can convict murderers, rapists, stalkers. But what happens when that same data is used to assess whether a student has attended a protest? What if the student that is protesting is actually protesting an oppressive government and that information from their Fitbit is shared with the very people that are oppressing them? And what if the penalty for protesting against that government or that particular issue is death? I mean, the law surrounding the sharing of this data is insanely complicated, and it's a goalpost that is constantly moving as technology evolves. I think one of my favourite quotes, which I've popped on the screen, is from a Wired article about this, which says, "While you have the right to remain silent, your gadgets mostly do not." So most people don't think about the fact that their personal data could be passed over to a law enforcement agency to be used against them or in support of them. In fact, most people don't even think that their data will be shared or even bought by a different company. So think about the fact that Google now owns Fitbit. Until the regulator stepped in, there was a very good chance that the data that had been collected by Fitbit could have been shared with the largest tech company in the world. So the very company that knows what's in your emails and messages is suddenly going to know whether you're healthy, whether you're exercising, or even whether or not you're on your period. It was a controversial deal and one that needed regulating. I think the regulator stepped in at the right time when they were supposed to. But this is the statement from Google that's on screen now. So this deal has always been about devices, not data. We've been clear since the beginning that we will protect Fitbit's users' privacy. We worked with global regulators on an approach which safeguards consumers' privacy expectations, including a series of commitments that confirm Fitbit users' health and wellness data won't be used for Google ads. And this data will be separated from other Google ads data. So maybe now we're safe, at least for now. But the moral of the story is that when we design products, we have to be aware that legislation evolves, products evolve, society expectations evolve, and even just companies evolve. So the second issue that I wanted to talk about, which is hopefully an example of what happens when we build a product so that can be used for a few different things, so this is something that I'm personally very passionately about. And also I think I have to think about this professionally every single day in my role at Captify. And that's algorithmic profiling. So it's well documented that we're currently undergoing a bit of a crisis of misinformation, or fake news, as Donald Trump would call it. So companies around the world are processing massive amounts of data to build algorithms to profile users. These profiles end up dictating what news or fake news that an individual sees, especially on social media platforms like Facebook or Twitter, or if you're on some of the less reputable news sites. This ends up creating an echo chamber, or like a filter bubble, so that the individual is constantly bombarded by the same types of articles and, most importantly, the same types of viewpoints. So these echo chambers make it almost impossible for an individual to get a balanced diet of news. And so the views that they hold are no longer challenged. In fact, they get reinforced. So as Prince Harry has said recently, in fact, literally 2 days ago, in one single household, you can have 3 or 4 versions of reality, depending on the news and content that you're supposed to. In a similar way, so similar algorithms that are used for this sort of pushing of misinformation can be tweaked a little bit and used to help like us fix massive problems. But what we've found with that is that sometimes we end up doing more harm than good by getting technology involved, because we accidentally or purposely sometimes program our own bias into the products that we're building. This is called algorithmic bias. So 2 examples of that, I guess, are we've designed facial recognition technologies that target criminal suspects on the basis of skin color. We've also, the we is society, not Captify, we've devised credit scoring algorithms that can disproportionately identify Black people as risks, preventing them from buying homes, getting loans, or finding jobs. And there was a great quote from Jamie Susskind in one of his books, Future Politics, that reads, "Algorithms see what they want depending on the purpose. So the same set of data can be used to ask whether someone is likely to commit a crime, whether someone will default on their mortgage, whether someone is likely to be a terrorist, or whether someone is likely to be susceptible to marketing." So how does this affect me professionally? Well, although Captify is thankfully not in the business of disinformation or credit scoring, our product very much depends on us profiling groups of people into segments or audiences, for example, like young professionals or new parents. And we ensure that the adverts that get served to those groups are as relevant as possible. Our end goal, of course, is completely different from that of the companies that are purposely pushing misinformation. But the algorithms that drive our product aren't a massive world away. I mean, they are different, but they're not that different. So we need to ensure that our technology is used only for good. And we need to ensure that we're designing technology that we as a company are proud of. And we do this in large part by implementing privacy by design. So what are the top 3 things that Captify is doing? So I'm just going to spend a couple of minutes now just talking about the top 3 things that Catchfire does to approach privacy by design, in the hope that it'll give you an idea of what privacy by design really looks like in practice. So firstly, we question what our product is capable of. As was mentioned previously, I mean, like Captify, we ingest a huge amount of data. I think currently we're connecting searches of probably over 2 billion devices globally. And the search intelligent algorithms that we build can tell us a significant amount about an individual user. So we do 2 things here to protect the end user. Firstly, we try to ensure that we're not processing any personal data that is legally sensitive. We go by the GDPR definition of special category data to determine what we think is sensitive, plus we add a few extra categories. And I've listed those categories on the screen. As you can imagine, when we ingest search data, we could easily find out whether someone identified, say, as being from a certain religion, or whether they identified as being gay from their search data alone. So to tackle this, we've built what we call a GDPR classifier. The GDPR classifier strips out all search events that contain phrases relating to special category data. So if everything works perfectly, we don't even ingest this data into Captify. We don't have any data that would be considered sensitive. However, it's obviously still possible for us to infer whether an individual identifies as being from, say, a certain religion by their search behavior. So the example we always use in Captify is that if someone's searching for recipes that are common for certain religious ceremonies or certain like religious times of year, we can probably deduce that they are from, they support that religion or they're part of that religion. As such, we sort of do like a 2-pronged thing here. So not only do we make sure that privacy by design is built into our product, but we also ensure that anything that happens after that is governed by a similar privacy by design policy. So we have a policy in Captify that we cannot build any audience segments that are aimed at grouping together individuals if those profiles are classed as sensitive data under the GDPR. For example, we wouldn't be able to build audiences of individuals we believed identified as being gay, or perhaps that they suffered from a certain medical condition. Now, this is where it gets quite interesting, because some of our competitors would argue that we should build these audiences because it allows us to provide like bespoke targeting to underrepresented groups. And I completely agree with that. I see their point. I can completely see a situation why targeting a certain diverse audience would be the best thing for the brand and also for the individual. But our argument is that we always have to think about the worst case scenario. So what if we build these audiences in the hope that we can target people in a positive way, but 5 years from now, that same audience is used to exclude people from a certain product or from getting a certain service? Now, this is the stuff that's pretty cutting edge from like a legal perspective, and it's the thing that gets me quite excited. And there is a legislative framework that we're operating in. I mean, there are laws about what you can and can't target, but so many of these decisions that we're making are based on what we believe is ethical. And we hope that by ensuring that we've thought about how our product will affect an end user's privacy in a worst case scenario, we're protecting them in the future too. So secondly, we're developing our products to be privacy first. As I'm sure all of you will know by now, or you can find out about it from probably just typing in Google in Google. Google has announced that it will stop the use of third-party cookies in Chrome by the end of 2023. The ban had originally been planned for 2022, but Google announced it was pushing this back to 2023, slightly earlier this year, I think in the summer. So for some companies in our ecosystem, that would have been like a huge sigh of relief. But Captify truly believes that we should put consumer privacy first, and that privacy should be the cornerstone of our entire product, not just because it's good for the end user, but also because it's good for the brands, it's good for everybody in that chain. So we're cracking on as planned to make our product fully cookieless, and we've seen some insanely good results. So if anyone's interested in hearing more about what we're doing from a cookieless perspective, I'm happy to talk about it. I'm sure Roxlana is happy to talk about it. We're generally so proud of what we're doing here. And ultimately, it's the most privacy-friendly advertising method, because what we're doing is that advertisers aren't going to be able to track the consumer on an individual level. They'll be targeting the ad based on the context of the page that they're landing on and all of the intent signals that would like indicate someone is likely to be actually consuming that content. This way, consumers can be served with ads that are relevant to them, but also they're like maintaining their data privacy. And finally, and this is, I didn't even think about calling it this until I putting the slides together. But in Captify, we try to go one step further than privacy by design. And although we don't always call it this in practice, mainly because I probably just started calling it this today, but we try to instill a culture of ethics by design into our entire ecosystem. Now, there is a distinction between the law and ethics, and like what's legally right and what's morally right. So the best example we have of this, which I guess everyone will know, is the story of Rosa Parks. So just in case you don't know, just let me set the scene here. So it's 1955. Rosa Parks boarded a segregated city bus on the way home from work. Back at the times in 1955 in Alabama, a segregated bus meant that Black passengers had to sit at the back of the bus and the front was reserved just for white people. Rosa Parks took a seat near the middle of the bus, just behind the white section. However, at the next stop, more people got on the bus and they filled up the white section. So Rosa Parks was asked to move further to the back of the bus. She refused. Now, asking to move to the back of the bus was completely legal under the segregation laws at the time, but we can all agree that it wasn't ethical. The point is, laws change. But ethics moves in line with societal expectations and is a much better marker of what is right and what is wrong. So in the same way as the Fitbit example, it may have been legal for the data to be shared with a governmental body for the purposes of law enforcement. But once we consider the fact that the government body could use that information to take the names of protesters who might be trying to change an unethical law, for example, it suddenly feels a bit different. It's about that gut feeling. So at Captify, we try to encourage all employees, but especially like our product and engineering teams, to follow their gut when assessing whether what they're doing is right or wrong. Plenty of times an engineer will come to me and ask if something's legal, but they already know in their gut that something's not quite right. So we try to explore that. And if we don't feel comfortable with it, it doesn't get built into our product. So that's a quick insight into sort of the top 3 things we do at Captify to practice privacy by design. And we're by no means perfect, and we're trying to improve our processes all the time. So just to follow up on what Sabrina said earlier and give a quick plug to Captify, the problems we deal with are incredibly diverse, and we need a diverse workforce to help us tackle them. As you can imagine, when we're bouncing around these ideas from an engineering perspective, from a product perspective, it really helps to have such like an incredible diversity of ideas and diversity of people in that room. So we want to recruit engineers who are privacy champions, who are diverse, who want to work on a product that really is at the cutting edge of the law. So if you do want that information, you can ask me, Roxana, Sabrina. We'd love to keep that conversation alive. So what can you do? I realize I'm rattling through this quite quickly, but you might can tell that I have a bit of a sore throat, so I'm just keeping it going before my voice goes. So I wanted to spend these last few minutes talking to you about what you can do in your work, if you don't work at Captify, to ensure you're practicing privacy by design. So firstly, I want to go back to that key takeaway from the beginning. Just because you build a product to be used in a particular way doesn't necessarily mean that it will be used that way. Now, as techies, you might not have full control over how your creation gets used once it's out in the real world. But you can certainly make sure that you're doing everything that you can to champion the privacy aspects of your work before it gets set out into the real world. So my first tip would just be document everything. Document why you are building something in a certain way, what the use case is for the thing that you're building, like why are you actually building that product in the first place? How is it supposed to be used? What have you done to ensure that the product is as secure as possible? Is security literally bedded into everything that you've done during the design stage? Have you considered what else your product can be used for? Have you just taken a step back and just done that worst case scenario for half an hour of, is there anything that I'm building now that can be used against somebody rather than for somebody? And are you collecting more data than you actually need to make the product work? This is something we try and challenge ourselves a little bit at Captify of, do we need all that data? If we can drive the same insights with 2/3 of the data instead of all of it, we won't collect that extra data. Secondly, ask questions. You have so much power as a technical team. The majority of people in your organization, I can promise you, are going to have absolutely no idea how you do what you do. So don't feel for like 1 second that you can't challenge other areas of your company about how they're using your product, how they plan to use their product, what they're doing with your product next. And similarly, if you see something being used in a way that you're uncomfortable with, or you see somebody doing something where you think, that's not quite the reason why I built that product in that way in the first place, just speak up. I promise you that your views are, I say, just as valid as everyone else, almost more valid than what other people think. Thirdly, this is something personal to me, but become best friends with your DPO or legal department. So I love working with Catchfire's product and engineering teams. And like I've just said, I can honestly say that I don't understand what they're talking about at least 50% of the time. But I probably speak to at least one of them every single day. If you get your DPO or legal team involved early, you can ensure that you're not wasting time building something that won't even be allowed to be released. And in fact, if you get them involved early enough, they can probably help you tweak your plans so that you can do the thing that you want to do while still ensuring that privacy is number one. Maybe they can even make it better. Trust me, getting your DPO or legal team involved early is completely worth it. And finally, it seems obvious to say that you should ensure that you're thinking about privacy at every stage of product development. However, I encourage all of you to do that thing where you go one step further than that and really start practicing this idea of ethics by design. It's something that's really important to me, but it's also really important to most companies, and it's also super important to society. So I think it was a scholar that estimated that it would take, I think it was 76 working days to read all of the privacy policies that we encounter in a typical year. So we can safely assume that not everyone is reading a privacy policy before handing over their data. I'll put my hands up. I write these privacy policies, and I'm definitely not reading every privacy policy that comes my way. So how do we protect those people, and how do we protect society generally? And the answer to that is we build good privacy-first ethical products. But when I say we build that, I kind of mean you build that, because I certainly have no idea how to code. So I want to leave you with this quote, because, and it's from Jamie Suskind's book again, because obviously I've just read it, as you can probably tell. But I think it's like a really good quote about like explaining the power that you have as engineers at this point. But he says, the digital life world will demand more of us all. From the shiniest CEO to the most junior programmer, those who work in tech will assume this role of particular influence. So in the long history of the world, said John F. Kennedy in 1961, only a few generations have been granted the role of defending freedom in its hour of maximum danger. And we need philosophical engineers worthy of the name. So privacy by design or ethics by design probably won't solve all of our problems, but I genuinely think it's a really good place to start. I got through that a little bit faster than I expected, but thank you. And do you have any questions?
Thank you for your talk. There is a question. What was the biggest data privacy challenge you dealt with at Captify?
Oh, good question. For me, it's always that. So the GDPR tells us that we can't target people based on that special category data that was on one of the earlier slides. And we can't target people based on that unless we have their consent, which most ad tech companies don't. But there are loads of grey areas in and around that it's not written into law, but it's questions that we have to ask ourselves. And one of those questions that has come up quite recently is like, what do we feel about running campaigns for pregnancy? Because you can tell quite easily by search intent whether or not somebody's pregnant or somebody's trying to get pregnant. But what some of the issues that the ad tech industry as a whole is facing is what happens when somebody who is pregnant loses, miscarries or loses the baby before they carry to full term. Now, the algorithms that we generally design will put people in this new mum's pregnancy audience, a pregnancy camp, and keep sending them like new mum adverts. So one of the questions that is going around in the industry at the moment is, should we be able to target, or should we track whether or not someone's then starting to search for miscarriage symptoms, to track whether or not we think that they should be taken out of a pregnancy audience? So that's something that we haven't actually come across yet at Captify, but it's those type of grey areas that I think are the biggest challenge and the things that just make it really interesting.
Thank you for your answer. And there is one more. How do you communicate data privacy ideas and issues to the engineering team? I mean, that engineering team just doesn't know what data is private, and maybe there are some trainings or resources.
So there's quite a few good resources online. So how we do it in Captify, obviously, is that I'm quite embedded in the product team. So I see things getting designed and I can say yes or no to things and then explain why. But if you don't have a privacy team where you work, there's a couple of things online, like the Institute of, I think actually it's called the International Association of Privacy Professionals, and that's just like a really good website where it tells you all of the different legislations that's coming up. But that's like the technical way of doing it. I still think it goes back to this idea of like ethics by design. So every time you do something, even if you don't know if that data is private, I think it's a good idea just to think, would I be happy if the company knew that about me? So that could be anything from like, am I happy that the company knows that I have asthma? Or am I happy that the company knows that I'm suffering from a disease that's a lot more serious as a whole than asthma? Or am I happy whether or not a company wants me to find out whether or not I belong to a certain religion? So if you have that weird gut feeling where you think, maybe not, that's a really good time to get somebody else involved or check your thought process with somebody else.
Thank you. I also want to ask you a question. What I noticed in Ukrainian market that there are like rarely data protection officers, especially a lot of companies which work only locally in Ukraine. They say that like we don't need to take care about GDPR because we don't work with European Union countries, so we don't need data protection officer or any like legal team. So what would you advise for engineers who are concerned with the privacy or leaders in the company that wants to kind of embed the privacy to convince someone who makes these decisions to actually hire the legal team for that?
So I think firstly, I think we talk a lot about the GDPR because that's sort of the biggest privacy law that came into effect that changed the market quite substantially, at least in the EU, and also internationally if you worked with EU countries. But since then, we've had legislation pop up all across the world. So Ukraine's not quite there yet, but we've had, there's now quite strict data protection laws coming up in China. We've got them in like Latin America. The US has got the California Consumer Privacy Act, and actually got a few different variations of Californian privacy legislation. And that's going across the US as well. So the first thing I would say is it will hit Ukraine at some point. There might be a little bit of a lag before you get actual legislation, but it's likely to be coming. And secondly, it doesn't really matter. It's almost, I guess, the same answer before. It doesn't really matter whether or not it's lawful and whether or not you can do something. I think it's trying to get leaders in companies to always think, yes, but should we do this? And I think that's something that engineers especially can always challenge senior leaders in their company of, yes, but this can also be used in this way. You have a different brain to some people at the top of the company who might be on a more of like a sales role. So, or like your CEO, for example, might be somebody who is ex-sales rather than like ex-techie. But brains work in different ways. So something that you're designing and you can think, actually I can think of another 5 to 10 use cases for this and 5 of them are bad. Sometimes it's worth like flagging that to other people who just don't think like that, and their job isn't to think like that. Ultimately, if you build something that's privacy first and it's secure, people will want to use it, and that will be reflected in the bottom line of the company. We see this all the time at Captify. People are really interested in our cookieless product, not least because it's performing insanely well. Like it's doing so well, but also it's important for brands to understand that they're working with a company who does value privacy, and they should value privacy. And the end consumer will use that brand more. So if the legislative angle doesn't work for people who are more senior, normally the revenue one does, or at least worry them enough that whatever it is that the company is designing could be used for bad as well as good.
Thank you. Are there more questions? Because I don't see additional questions in the chat. You still have a chance to ask a question. I guess no more questions, so you can reach out to Jodie. She mentioned her email. You can write comments under this video because it will be posted right after the event. So you can ask more about that and we will answer those questions as soon as possible. And thank you for attending the event and thank you for delivering this amazing talk.
Thank you for having me.